Hello and welcome back to our podcast. This is part 17 of the series Unraveling the Revelation, a detailed look at the influences on the Church of God's interpretation of the book of Revelation. I'm Dale Rood. If you have any comments, questions, or criticisms, please send those to respondingtoreligiousramblings@gmail.com. Be sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel to receive regular updates when new material is available. Also, if you would, please share this channel with a friend. You can do so at the link there shown on the screen, or you can just type in responding_to_religious_ramblings, and you can specifically put the name of this series of episodes, and it should come up for you. Let's take a real quick look again at our 6th and 7th seal charts compared. The top one, as we've discussed several times now, is a display of what we commonly call the 6th seal view, or the evening light movements breakdown of the book of Revelation. It consists of 4 different church ages, namely the morning time, the dark ages, the cloudy day, and the evening light. The 7th seal view, which is our focus on the latest episodes, and will be for at least another episode, is the 7th seal view. It's divided into 7 different parts, and basically what it did was it separated the Dark Ages into 2 church ages. It separated the Protestant age into 2 church ages, and then it also separated the evening light into 2 church ages. So it has a total of 7 church ages on that chart. This interpretation is based on the foundation of the evening light chart that you see in the top section, in that it shares the basic foundation of 4 timelines with the years associated with each one. It just provides more detail and it breaks up those 3 church ages into 2 rather than 1. Okay, let's take a look at the timelines. We've already discussed all of the 6 seal dates that we saw there at the top, and in our last 2 podcasts we covered AD 530 and AD 1730. Today we'd like to take a look at 1930, the beginning of the 7th seal message, or the second coming out. So let's get a little background. I'm not going to review in these episodes because it takes too much time. So make sure that you either have a good understanding of the content that was in episodes 8 or 9, or since we are quite a ways down the road now, you might want to go back and review those episodes, because each one of these episodes is built on the foundation of previous episodes. So I covered a lot of the issues that were going on in the evening light time from AD 1830 until around 1930. I think I said I should have said AD 1880 until 1930. That's all that information is covered in episodes 8 and 9. And so these 2 episodes describe the overall condition and concerns that some leaders felt regarding what was happening within the movement and the events that were taking place. So again, it's important that you understand the environment of that day so that we look back on them and we can see kind of how people may have been thinking. And if you don't remember, just real quickly, I'll read these off. There were some issues that had surfaced from time to time, including the issue of education and the Anderson Bible Training School. There was concerns regarding organization, how that they were forming boards and committees, race relations, tongues and the influence of Pentecostalism and emotionalism, the use of musical instruments, changes or de-emphasis in certain doctrines, dress standards, including the necktie, and involvement in ecumenical church bodies. Those were some of the issues that were going on during those times. Now, I didn't go into this in detail, but I want to mention this here, and I think you'll understand why as we move along in this episode. But prior to the seventh seal message, there was another group that was formed as a result of the wearing of a necktie. It was led primarily by C.E. Orr, or Charles E. Orr, and basically what happened in the early years of the Church of God movement, they opposed the wearing of necktie, which they labeled as superfluity of the flesh. Now, they did make exceptions for saints that held business positions, those that worked in an environment where there might have been a requirement for a necktie as part of the routine business attire. But neckties generally were not worn by the saints, and they certainly were not worn in meetings or gatherings of the saints. And so they got that from James 1:21, where it says, "Wherefore lay apart all filthiness and superfluity of naughtiness, and receive with meekness the grafted word, which is able to save your souls." Now, superfluity, that's a word we don't really use too much today, if at all even. But what it basically meant, it was something that was excessive or unnecessary. And so it began to, things began to change a little bit. And around 1910 or so, Brother Byram kind of weighed in on the matter. And I remember Brother E.E. Byram was the editor of the paper, and whoever was the editor was pretty much the person that had the last say in matters of not only doctrine, but matters of standards and so forth. And so there began to be people wearing neckties. And some of the older brethren did not like it. Some of the new brethren, some of the newer people really didn't see much of an issue with it. And so in 1910, and I do want you to go back and look these two articles up in the archives over in Anderson. And again, that's available online at Nicholson Library. Go to archives, scroll down to Gospel Trumpets, and you can find all of the issues of the Gospel Trumpet going back to the very beginning. So I would like for you to look up the September 15th, 1910 issue of the Gospel Trumpet and read an article titled "Marching Along the Pathway." Now, Brother Byram in this case had more of a stance against the necktie, against wearing the necktie. But he was also warning of spirits that were working to try to divide the movement. He was saying that, we need to be loving to each other and kind to each other. Yes, we want to stand for what's right, but we need to stand in the right way. And so he did tend to, at least in my judgment, he did tend to basically say that the wearing, he never actually, I don't believe he used the word necktie in that article, but he would talk about a certain article of clothing. He was kind of staying maybe neutral or slightly even leaning towards not wearing those neckties. But that did not settle the controversy. And it continued on. And it continued on to the point where three ministers in particular, and I believe one of them was C.E. Orr, they were threatening to start a new paper. They were threatening to withhold resources from the Gospel Trumpet, from the missionary efforts that were ongoing, if Brother Byram did not take a stand against the necktie. And on the other side, you had the more liberal class that were also saying the same thing. They were saying, its time has come here. We need to move on past some of these things, and if not, we're thinking about withdrawing resources and supporting another paper. And so Brother Byram addressed this issue again in the Gospel Trumpet, September the 11th, 1913, in an article. It was actually an editorial article, but he had a section there called Liberals and Radicals. And he called this stuff out, this infighting that was taking place. First of all, he let them know that it's not right to make threats like this. This is not how we work. We don't work to threaten to go and start our own paper and cause a schism in the body. That's not how we resolve things. He said that the New Testament, they had issues, and they came together and they discussed them, and they, prayed about it and moved forward. And so I really would like for you to read that, because while the issue there was the wearing of a necktie, the issue to me, and the article really points this out, was the divisions that was already taking place in the Church of God Reformation movement. These are not things that you heard about in the earlier years. Even in the Gospel Trumpet, there was just that wasn't something where people were threatening to go do something different and leave the movement and start their own thing. And so Brother Byron spent a lot of time addressing that particular issue. And then also he made a comment about the leaving this matter, him not taking sides on it, but leaving the matter to the conscience of the individuals. He said, "No, we don't need to have people." He said, "We had some people that came to camp meeting and wore a necktie at camp meeting and got up and spoke." He said that's not right. We know that this is an issue that people have concerned about, and so we need to be respectful of each other's position, whether that was on the, I'll say, the left or the right hand side. And so anyhow, I remember a story being told, and I didn't find this in the Gospel Trumpet, but I have read about this before in other places, where ultimately this issue was just not coming to completion. And so in a meeting, Brother Byram got up and he walked over to one of the ministers there, and I believe it was one of the ministers that was against the wearing of the necktie, but he had on a hat. And on that hat he had I believe it was like a silk band wrapped around it. And Brother Byram walked over there and he borrowed the hat. He pulled off the silk band there and he stuck it up at the top of his shirt, and he he said, "What's the difference?" I guess it was at that point that the issue was settled, at least among the larger body. And I'm not laughing at the issue. I'm laughing at how he would have dealt with this. It's just funny. But anyhow, to those on the other side of this that did not, approve of wearing a necktie, the necktie was an issue, and I've seen some of their correspondence going back and forth, and and really some very strong stands and strong statements were being made. But they saw the necktie issue not so much as the item itself, but as being representative of the church drifting into the worldliness. And so what they eventually did was they split away, and they were led by C.E. Orr. And they labeled the other side as compromisers and liberals, and the other side labeled them as fanatics and fictitious. And so a split took place. Now, if you were to talk to the people back in those days about the split, the folks that left and started, we'll talk about them on the next slide here, started a new movement, they would say that it wasn't a split. They would say that what they were doing was just maintaining the standards and the beliefs and the practices of the early days of the Church of God. In essence, that is true. So they wouldn't have viewed it as a split per se, but that's essentially what it was. So C.E. Orr and a few others with him, they led the anti-necktie saints, and they left the Church of God Reformation movement, and they rallied around a paper and publishing house called Faith and Victory, located in Guthrie, Oklahoma. And that's where C.E. Orr is buried. So they considered themselves the heirs apparent of the evening light message. And in fact, in March of 1961, quite a few years later, when they were telling the story about C.E. Orr, in their paper includes the statement that he was, quote, one of the pioneers who stood for the original teachings. So they found and believed and held that the Church of God, if truth is truth, it's not changing. And so we should stand for the truth, and we should not change. And so to this day, they still consider themselves to be the heirs, if you will, and maybe that's not the right word, but the heirs apparent of the continuation of the evening light message. And so what they did was at this publishing house, they reprinted many of the early Church of God books over the years. And I know that publishing house is now closed, but they have done a tremendous service for the Church of God in general, in that they have scanned so many of the old Church of God books, and they've made them available at their website there. I would strongly encourage you to go and read some of those books. You can even download them to your computer. You can do research like I've been doing here, kind of showing you some quotes and stuff. You can download these books and read them for yourself. And I tell you, that is a gold mine, really. So I'm very thankful for those saints out there for all their efforts that they've had over the years in republishing the books. They're the ones that put out the Evening Light Songbook that even the Seventh Seal uses. And so anyways, they have done a tremendous job, and I really can't say anything bad about them. I know some of them. I've been to their meetings, and I will tell you that they are very kind people, very nice people, very accepting, even of those of people like myself that don't have that background. I've never been associated with that movement, but I have visited them. I've enjoyed their meetings. I hope someday make it out to their national camp meeting. I'd like to do that. But they're very sweet people, and I don't consider them to be fanatics or anything like that. Not at all. Yes, they do hold a different viewpoint, and that's fine. That's fine. It's not hurting anybody if they don't wear neckties. The truth is, I hate neckties. I wish I didn't have to wear neckties. I had a job. I worked in a profession where we had to dress up. At a minimum, we could dress business casual, but we had to wear suit and ties. That was just part of our attire, and I would have loved to be able to go to my supervisor and say, "Hey, I believe that I believe that the Bible teaches against the wearing of neckties." And so, as I'm a religious, I'm a conscientious objector. I would have loved to be able to not wear a necktie to work, but I think if I went in there to my leaders and said the necktie is a superfluity of the flesh of naughtiness, or however it was worded, they probably would have fired me for thinking that I had lost it. So anyhow, just put that in there for what that's worth. I don't like to wear neckties. I don't wear a necktie unless I have to. It has nothing to do with a religious conviction or even anything that I believe is taught in the Bible. So that being said, I'll tell you another funny story. I got pictures there of Brother Orr. That was the one in the left-hand side is him in his younger years, and the one on the right in the middle is him in his middle age, and then the one on the right is Brother Orr shortly before he died. And so I had people come over my house to look at my library and, talk and share and back and forth. And I remember one time I had an individual that was associated with this particular group. And they came over and we were talking and sharing. I said, now, Brother Orr, he wore a necktie at one time. Oh, no, not my Brother Orr. I said, yeah, he did. Well, he was against the necktie. So I pulled out a book that I had, and this picture was in the book, and this was in the 1920s. And they just was in shock that he wore a necktie. And so, but anyways, as the story is told by them, that particular group, Brother Orr tried to be reasonable about the matter, and for a short period of time, he put on a necktie, to try to promote unity. But he took it off right afterwards. But he did happen to get his picture taken with a necktie, and so there it is. I also have another friend that was part of this same group, and apparently at one point they took a picture of Brother Orr who was wearing a necktie. It might have even been this one, I'm not sure. And they edited out the tie and had included the picture in a publication of some sort. And so they really feel strong about that issue. And if anybody happens to have that particular brochure or whatever it was, I'd like to get a copy of that, just for what it's worth. But anyhow, he definitely was against neckties. And some of those brethren out there, they did hold some pretty strong convictions on things. Just recently, I was talking to one of their ministers, and this particular minister asked if I knew of any books that would be good for new converts to kind of help them understand the Bible and our history and that kind of stuff. And I was like, well, there's a lot of Sixth Seal books. And this particular minister said, no, I don't want to give them that, because so there's a lot of stuff in there. It's just, a little bit out there. I mean, at one point they were teaching against picnics and eating ice cream or ice cream gatherings or something. It was just stuff that's way out there, at least to me. Now, it may not be to them. It may be a big deal to them, but to me, it's not. So anyways, there were some people that were a little far out, but you know what? You've got them people in every single group. We got ours too. I think they're in every single group. So I really can't label the Guthrie movement as fanatical, because they were just doing what they had what they were taught, and trying to hold on to, quote unquote, the old paths. And I can't see how we can find fault with that. But that's my view, and I really don't want to bring my views in on all this, but that is how I feel about that. Okay, so all that aside, the Guthrie movement, since it separated from the Church of God Reformation movement, and this is all in about 1910, 1913 or so, they were not exposed or part of the Seven Seal teaching. So they still hold to the original 4 church age interpretation of Revelation as it was taught by Warner and Smith. Now, interesting, at least in my observations and discussions with several of those people, they don't really have much of a focus of the book of Revelation. They don't really get into that. They have a few leaders, I'm told, that kind of, can engage in that kind of conversation. But generally, it's not something that they teach much on or even talk much about. So, and I found that, at least in my limited experience in talking to the people that I know from there, they don't talk much about Revelation symbols or timelines and stuff like that. Now, that being said, the group seems relatively unified, but they've also had their set of issues. They've had some splits over the years, and actually the largest being in the mid-1980s, when one of their up-and-coming ministers led a pretty large exodus of young ministers and also members out of that group and started another group called the Church of God Restoration. And interestingly enough, as time went on, they adapted the seven seal teaching, but they also put a little twist on it. And so in a future episode, I'm going to kind of introduce you to them and who their leaders were, who their primary leader was, and kind of some of the things that's going on today. They have changed drastically even since the time they got started in the mid-'80s. And so I just want to kind of show you a little bit about, tell you a little bit about them, show you some of the charts that they use and those kind of things. But we'll do that a little bit later on. And by the way, one of the reasons why I think that these people were able to draw away members and leaders from the Guthrie movement was because the Guthrie movement, they've settled over the years. Their meetings are not very, and I'm not saying this critical, but their meetings are not very lively. The singing's not real lively. There's not a lot of shouting and rejoicing and that kind of stuff. And so the leader who pulled them away was basically saying, well, this group is dead. They're all dried up, and they don't even rejoice anymore. But now we're going to break that silence. We're going to break that silence, and we're going to be like the early years of the sixth seal. So that they were able to use that and as a drawing away point from that particular movement. Okay, so let's go back to Goodnight. So let me read this to you, and I think the people from the Guthrie movement will appreciate this. This is what he had to say regarding the sixth seal, or those early evening light pioneers of the Church of God. In this Philadelphia church, I wish to say again, there is no fault found in the teachings of the church. We hear some say, at this time, we have been in the past fanatical, going to the extremes with Bible truths. Christ does not say thus of this church age. Possibly some individuals have been in a measure fanatical on some lines or of certain opinions as to the meaning of certain scriptures, but the Bible line of truth has been correct and no reproof against it, with no reproof against it. To be somewhat fanatical is not so destructive as to be too light and liberal. In this, we see the spiritual standing of the Philadelphia church. Now, he said this in his very first book that he published there, and he said that was published in 1933. So basically what he was saying was the seventh seal, message is not that the past teachings under the sixth seal were wrong, because he said basically God didn't find any fault with them in the Philadelphia letter, which he believed represented that particular church age. So the seventh seal was not to be an undoing of the doctrines taught in the sixth seal, but rather it was to be we should embrace those teachings. That's basically what he was saying. Okay. So let's talk now about AD 1930. AD 1930. So we have this on our charts, on the seven seal charts, as the beginning of the seven seal message, or the second coming out. Now, there's 50 years between 1880 and 1930. And then there's 50 years between 1930 and 1980, we're going to be talking today. We've already talked about 1880. We're going to be talking today about 1930. So we've got behind us, we have 1880, and in front of us, we have 1980. So a total of 100 years, but 50 years for each segment of time. So we're going to ask ourselves those 5 questions again. Okay, and let me just say, as we're getting further into this, it's becoming more difficult to try to capture the symbols and the timelines that they ended up generating. Okay, it's getting more difficult, and I think the reason for that is we're getting more focused on our particular movement. Now we're not talking about things that happen globally. In the past we were talking about, the apostasy. We were talking about the Dark Ages. We were talking about Catholicism. We were talking about Protestantism. All those things had global impact. But when you start getting into 1880, we're now talking about a movement. Okay, and it's a sizable movement, but it's nothing in compared to the global events that we saw in the previous church ages. And so even as we're progressing along in the movement, now we're going to talk about a movement within the movement. Okay? So I just want to point that out. I've done the best I can to try to capture their thoughts and use their the scriptures that they were referring to. But it's not been an easy task. And you notice I haven't put as many episodes up like I was doing before, because it's taken me a lot more effort now to try to explain what those brothers were thinking at that time. Okay, so let's look forward in prophecy. Now remember, that's what prophecy is. If I've said that once, I've said it a dozen times, and I'll probably say it again more. Forward, prophecy looks forward. History looks backwards. So if this is truly prophecy, if the book of Revelation is about prophecy, we should expect there to be some kind of guidance in terms of what's out ahead, what might be happening, when it might be happening. Okay? And that's important. And so when I'm answering these questions on this particular chart, I have a difficult time doing that. Okay? So let's just read it. Looking forward in prophecy, what symbol or symbols of time is used to reach 1930? So how do we get to 1930 when we were at 1880? How do we explain, and in Scripture explain, that there was going to be a 50-year span that was prophesied? Now I can tell you there's nothing, certainly nothing I could find in the Old Testament that pointed to this 50-year gap. Now, clearly, as previously discussed, Warner and Smith and even Goodnight, they referred to the Evening Light era, or the Church of God Reformation movement. They found that in the Old Testament. And so they believed that the evening light, that scripture that we often refer to there in Zechariah, they believed that it referred to a time of restoration, and that there was going to be an evening light movement that was standing on the truths that were taught in the morning time, or that church that we read about in the New Testament. But even in that description of the evening light, there's no reference anywhere that evening light was going to be broken up into 2 separate church ages. It's not there. It just refers to evening light. They applied that to the Church of God, but there's nothing there that even indicates that time era was going to be split evenly between 2 church ages, or 2 epochs of time. So there's nothing in the Old Testament. In the New Testament, Now, Brother Goodnight did use some symbols, and they're found in Revelation, the 6th chapter, verse number 17. Revelation, the 16th chapter, verses number 1 through 7. Revelation, the 18th chapter, verse number 8. He used the day symbol that was mentioned in those three passages to represent the evening light, and he assigned 100 prophetic years to this symbol. So basically, he said when it referred to day in those three verses, it was actually talking about 100 years. Now, we've seen the 100 years as a day symbol in the previous prophecies. Specifically, I'm not going to go into all the history there. You can look that up. But we've seen one day representing 100 years before. And so in that case, then he is basically saying that the evening light church age was going to last 100 years. Okay, then he went into Revelations 8, verse number 12 through 13, and he used that passage to show that only 2/3 of truth had been restored during the Protestant era. So what he was basically saying was, in 1530, the teaching of justification was restored by Martin Luther, and then in 1730, the teaching of sanctification was restored by the Wesley brothers. Okay, so he says that's 2/3 of light, but there was still another third that had not been proclaimed, and that third was the message of unity. The message of the Church of God and the message of unity. And that still needed to be proclaimed. So he felt like that was what was restored in the evening light. Okay? However, no reference to a time symbol representing those 50-year spans, the one from 1880 to 1930. He didn't have any scripture for that. He didn't have any symbol or anything. Basically, they selected the year 1530 based on not prophecy or symbols, but rather conditions that existed. So, what he was basically saying, these brothers, Brother Warner and Brother Byram and all these early ones, they could have searched the scriptures through and through and had a complete knowledge, but they would have never come to 1930. Because there's no symbols there, certainly no symbols with a timeline associated with it that would get them to 1930. So it's another example. We've seen this before in the past, in which these dates were not prophesied dates; they were dates that were calculated, or in some cases, they were they dated back to a particular date. So they backdated to a particular date. And for me, this is some of the stuff that, a number of years ago, that I read this stuff and I was like, it doesn't make sense to me. This is not prophecy. This is a history lesson. This is not prophecy, the way it was being used. And so this is what kind of sparked my interest in wanting to dig into this a lot more. All right. So let me just put a graph up here I created that kind of puts into, in a visual way, what I just told you. So across the top we have the evening light time, represented by Zechariah 14:7. And it says, "But it shall be one day, which shall be known to the Lord, that at evening time it shall be light." So Brother Goodnight then took that one day to represent 100 years, specifically from 1880 to 1980. So that's 100-year span. Okay, and then he divided that 100 years up into two 50-year spans. The first starting in 1880 and ending in 1930, and then the second, or the seventh seal, starting in 1930 and ending in 1980. So that's one way that he got the year 1980, by taking that and making that day into a prophetic day, which would then equal, in his mind, 100 years. Okay, second question. What historical event was believed to be prophesied in the Old Testament or New Testament to happen in the year 1930 AD? Well, we already mentioned that there's nothing in the Old Testament that I know of. And I've read their literature. So again, if someone has more information on this, please contact me and correct me. But I haven't been able to find where even the Seven Seal advocates referred to anything in the Old Testament in terms of a timeline that would lead them to the year 1930. Now, in the New Testament, again, the same thing is true. There's no symbol that has a timeline associated with it. But here's how Brother Goodnight kind of came up with this idea of 52 periods of 50 years. Okay, so once he established 1930 as a milestone on the timeline, he applied the first 50 years of the evening light to the sixth seal, and that was from 1880 to 1930. And he stated that Babylon had received her first cup of judgment from the early Church of God ministry. In other words, the preaching of the gospel was exposing Babylon, which consisted of Protestantism and Catholicism, and they were basically explaining the evils of those systems, and so they were pouring out judgment on Mystery Babylon. And then he said, okay, that lasted for 50 years. And so then he used the verse we're going to read here in a minute. He used Revelation 18, verse number 6, where it talked about making it double. He said, okay, that second cup of judgment is to be poured out on Babylon. And that since it's the second cup and it's double, it's another 50 years. So that's how we got 1980 on our Revelation charts. So he used 1930 to 1980, a 50-year span there, and called that the double cup that was being poured out. Okay, let's read that scripture. And I'm going to read some comments here. Actually, I'm not going to read the scripture. I'm just going to read the comments that Brother Goodnight. You can look the scripture up yourself. This is in his first book that he published, Chart Explanation, in 1933. It says this. In Revelation the 18th, and the words in parentheses are my words. In Revelation 18, verse number 6, we are told to reward her, or Babylon, even as she rewarded us. And the cup she filled to her double. In the judgments given her through the sixth seal ministry, she got the first cup. Now, in this fifth vial, and I'll talk about the vials in a minute, the fifth vial he taught was basically repeating the first three vials on and pouring judgment on papal Rome and Protestantism in this seven seal time. He said, now in this fifth vial, she will get the next judgment, making it double. So, there you have it. That's how you come to 100 years. The day symbol that he used in the passage referring to the evening light, he made that into 100 years. And then the judgment being poured out double, the first being in the sixth seal and the second being in the seventh seal. So that's how we got 1980 on our chart. It's that simple. Okay, now, I said I was going to show you a little bit about the vials. This chart here, this table I put together, kind of explains it. He believed that the first three vials there on the left-hand side were poured out in the sixth seal in that first 50 years, from 1880 to 1930. And those were poured out on religious institutions, secret lodges, Protestantism, papal Rome, the people of Protestantism. Those were the three that in the 16th chapter of Revelation, those were the three that were poured out. Then he said that double portion then, or that double cup, would be poured out in the seventh seal, the second half of those 100 prophetic years from 1930 to 1980. And that there were 4 vials there. There was one being poured out, the New Testament gospel and the word, beginning in 1928, actually a couple years before 1930, and that one he believed was when he started having these thoughts, and these thoughts came to him. But he considered those as part of the seventh seal cups. And then the 5th, 6th, and 7th vial, the 5th being a repeat of those first 3 we just talked about. And then there were vials being poured out on heathen nations and worship, and then there was the radio vial. So anyways, those are the vials as he taught them. Now, I can tell you the more current 7th seal leaders, they've done some tweaking to these. Well, they no longer have a radio vial for sure. They no longer, for instance, have the sixth seal or 6th vial poured out on Islam or Mohammedanism. So there's some changes that they made along the way, but this is what he taught when he first started. Okay. So our next question. What happened in the year 1930 that was significant enough to mark it as the beginning of the 7th seal era? Now, I'm going to read this, and I'm sorry it's a lengthy reading, but I just want to read it the way it is. Okay? I got this information from, most of this, from one of the historians over in Anderson, who was explaining what happened during that time period, and as well as another man that I've met online. He's a Church of God. I think he's a Church of God minister, and he had a few of these expressions in here. So this writing right here is not mine; it's theirs. And in the comments section on this particular slide, I have links to their articles. If anybody's interested in those, I could send those to you, at least the one of them. The other one was actually a post on Facebook. Okay, so there's a picture of F.G. Smith over on the right-hand side and a picture of C.E. Brown on the right-hand side, the lower part. Let me just read this. In 1916, Enoch Byram's former personal secretary, F.G. Smith, succeeded Byram as editor-in-chief of the Gospel Trumpet and de facto head of the company. Despite his suspicion of the growth of ecumenical machinery, it was Smith who steered the movement through the stormy waters of institutionalization between 1917 and 1929. However, by 1929, Smith's influence in the movement, once nearly invincible, was beginning to wane. The growing number of voices challenged his theology of the church, especially the notion of come-outism. Some ministers worried about his extensive influence so much that by 1929 he lost a bid for re-election as president of the missionary board. Although he was the incumbent, Smith was not even nominated to run for another term. In 1930, Smith was ousted as the editor-in-chief by the Gospel Trumpet Company. To his credit, freshly fired Smith humbly endorsed Brown publicly before the General Assembly, and it voted C.E. Brown in as the next editor-in-chief of the Gospel Trumpet Company. It was C.E. Brown, Smith's successor, who replaced come-outism with what he called a new approach to Christian unity. As Brown saw the church, all the saved in Christ are members of God's church, regardless of their denominational home. It was also Brown who advanced the idea of spiritual democracy, a notion which led to more inclusive participation in the national affairs of the movement. As a result of this transition, the powerful D.S. Warner, Daniel Sidney Warner, Enoch E. Byram, and F. G. Smith, or Frederick G. Smith, leadership line was over, and it was viewed by the Seven Seal advocates as a pivotal moment in moving the Church of God into a more liberal era into apostasy. Now, I put that last line in there. And so this is how this event in 1930 is explained. Now, this is being explained from people who are still involved in the movement. Okay, so let's be fair about that. This is how they described it. So I just wanted to put that out there and share that with you. You can take that for what that's worth. But definitely there was a demarcation that took place in 1930. Okay. In what secular historical literature do we find the year 1930 listed as a major milestone in church history? Okay, so I've done extensive searches. I have looked far and wide in historical books. I have done Google searches. I've talked to individuals. I've searched through Church of God history books, and this is kind of my interpretation and where I'm at in terms of answering this question. So let me read these are my answers. One would have to dig very deep into church history to find any significant event that happened in the global church in 1930. I've searched through many historical books and have come up short. Doing a Google search on the year 1930 results in nothing noteworthy, and certainly there is no significant event of a global nature or even in the United States that happened. Nothing of significance. And please, once again, if I haven't said this enough, I don't want anyone to take these episodes I'm putting out here and just take them as for face value. Please do not do that. I want you to do your own searching. I want you to look into the original resources that I'm sharing with you. I want you to spend some time looking into this. This is my journey. And also this is a snapshot of where I'm at. Okay? So please go look in the history books. You can get those at your library. You can get them through an interlibrary loan. Go and do your own search in church history books to see what you can find that happened in 1930. It doesn't take a whole lot of effort even to go into Google and ask Google that question. Now with AI on board, you can even go into AI and put that in there, and it'll give you a big printout. But it's not going to be long because there's not a lot there that happened in that year. All right. So once again, do your own research. Do your own examination. The facts remain that 1930 is only a significant year to those with a connection of the Church of God, to the Church of God Reformation movement. It's only a year significant to us. It is true that many changes took place within the Church of God around that time. It's absolutely true. To some, these changes reflected progress, and to others, they represented compromise. It's interesting to note that the early Seven Seal advocates remained connected to the Church of God. It would not be until the mid-40s that they officially disassociated from the movement. The reason for maintaining this connection may vary from person to person. So I've already showed you when we were talking about Brother Goodnight in our last, I think his last segment, even though he had all this and he wrote these books and had this view, he still stayed connected to the Church of God Reformation until the 40s. He didn't quote unquote come out of her. He stayed connected. And here very soon, as soon as we finish up with this timeline stuff, I'm going to introduce you to some other people that helped him and worked with him, and most of them stayed connected to the Church of God Reformation movement until later on, the 40s, and I think even one of them longer than that. So, why did they stay connected to a system that they were preaching against? I don't know. It's possible that the emphasis of unity was so strong that they didn't want to be involved in a split or they just wanted to stay connected. I don't know what their reasoning was for it. I don't have any idea, and unfortunately none of them are around to ask. Okay, so what Church of God writing do we, this is, I believe, our last question here. What Church of God writing do we first see 1930 AD, and who was the author? Okay, so the earliest mention we find of 1930 was in the Church of God writings, at least, was in Goodnight's 1933 book titled Chart Explanation of the Revelation with the Opening of the Last Seal. And the first instance of 1930 is found in the preface of that book. I just wanted to read some of this to you a little bit. Let me read this. And I even this, see if you see the 3 dots on there, I'm skipping through some stuff because that preface is very long, and I don't have the space, and some of it's not related to what we're talking about here. So let me just read this to you. In the year AD 1930, I wrote and mailed a small booklet, Chart Explanation of the Revelation, to the ministry of the Church of God for their consideration, asking that they might study the line of thought contained therein with me. Some gave the booklets some study and consideration, and through their cooperation and the help of the Lord, deeper thoughts regarding the revelation have been arrived at. Since that time, I have been out in the work in a number of states, busy practically all of the time. By the help and cooperation of the ministry, we have been able to arrive at many more truths in line with what we already had as given from the beginning for consideration. Some errors have been called out, and that's CULLED, called out, and many more truths added. So he's referring to a little pamphlet that he wrote in 1930, and he sent that out. He actually sent that pamphlet out, in 1930. I think he started working on it back like in 1928. But eventually it went to a little booklet, and he sent that out to the Church of God ministry, and some of them were like, okay, yeah. But that's where we first see 1930, is in that book. Now, it's in there in other places too. And so I highly encourage you to get a copy of that book. Reading that book is a real eye-opener. I already pointed out some things, conclusions that were made in that book that were pretty far out there. Let me just put it bluntly. They were pretty far out there. And you can go back in the previous episode and see some of those. Now, I have much respect for these brethren, including Brother Goodnight. I just recently found a really good picture of him. I've been trying to find a good picture of him, and I just found one. I was just thrilled when I got it. And so I don't look at him as a false prophet at all. I just think he was a man full of zeal. He was disappointed with some things that were happening, and he was looking for something better. And, these thoughts came to his mind. I do know for sure that he must have had access to some of Larkin's charts, because he used some of the same dates on Larkin's charts. So there is some kind of connection there. And so I'm just pointing this out by saying that even though he got it wrong, I don't view him as a false prophet or a bad person. I view him as a very zealous man who loved the Lord. He obviously loved the church. He was disappointed in conditions during his age, at his time. And he thought that this truth that he had, what he viewed as truth, he thought it was going to lead to something greater than even what had happened up until that time. Okay? So you have to ask yourself the question, like I had to ask myself the question, are we seeing something today that's greater than what we saw in the sixth seal? I mean, asking that question in itself is almost ridiculous. We have never seen, since 1930, we have never seen a move of God like they experienced in the sixth seal, and certainly not a move of God like we see in the morning time. Instead, what we have seen in the seventh seal is more splits, more infighting, more, confusion. And so what he was prophesying, not just from the prophetical point, but what actually happened, the fruit of it, has not produced this great earthquake that they thought was going to happen. And I know I'm going off a script here, and usually when I do that, I usually regret it later on, but this is where I'm at right now. We have some of these seven seal groups that just have a handful of congregations that think they are, and this is their quote, they are the true church of God. They are the remnant. We got 7 billion people on this planet, and some of these groups might have 500 people, and somehow they are the true, and everybody else, including people in other Church of God groups, seven seal groups even, they're all Babylon. That is not the message. That definitely is not the message. And so, but this is what's been happening. And if nothing else, I hope this study challenges everyone like it challenged me to think a little deeper, to go a little farther than where we have gone. I don't claim to have the gift of prophecy. I don't have it. I really am not even interested in those kind of things. My interests are more people related. But I hope that there's someone out there, or someone's out there, that will take this to the next level. I want to see a great revival take place. I want to see God working in our day like He did in times past. There's a reason, and so my hope is that someone, or someone's would get into this stuff and learn from where mistakes were made and find out what God is really saying. That's really what my hope is in all this. Okay, so let me just make some interesting observations, and then we're going to close out. So, as previously mentioned, the teaching of the seventh seal did not produce a split, unlike some of the other ones. It did not produce a split. There was no split in 1930. In fact, the truth be known, it was hardly even noticed. Now, a few years back, I was over in Anderson doing some research, and I talked to some gentlemen over there, brothers in the Lord, that have a history focus. And I asked, I said, "Have you ever heard of the seventh seal message?" They're like, "No, what's that?" I said, "Have you never even heard of a seventh seal movement?" No. These are people that know about what's going on. And they said, no, I don't anything. I have no idea what you're talking about. I said, well, you never heard anything about like a group that also has roots to the evening light, that are proclaiming revelation a little different, but are focused on the seventh seal? And he said, no. No, I don't know. And so I began to explain to him. I said, well, and I kind of told him the story here. And I explained to him, that he knew about the necktie split. He knew about the sanctification split in 1899. He knew about the next split we're going to talk about, which was the Earl Slacum split. He knew about that, but he knew nothing about seventh seal. And here we are, out here, proclaiming that we're the, seventh seal, last church age, last movement, and our our friends over in Anderson, they don't even know who we are. They never even heard of it. They don't have a clue. We're not even impacting people that's the closest to us, the people that we claim that we came from. They don't even know about us. So people over in China and Russia, and they don't have a clue. This is what I'm saying. Something's not right. So that's my bullet number 2 there. Now, there were some leaders who would eventually disassociate from Anderson in the 40s. Some of them did embrace the seventh seal teaching, but some did not. So they didn't leave Anderson to rally to something. They left Anderson to get away from something. So seventh seal did pick up a few advocates as part of that large split that took place. There were some that embraced that, but that was like a side note to them. That was definitely not their focus. It had nothing to do with them separating from Anderson. They had other issues, and I do want to talk about that. I'll probably talk about that later on. Maybe not this next episode, but a little further down the road. So that's all I have to share here. I know this time might be a little different. I've expressed some of my personal opinions. Again, I'm trying not to do that throughout the study, and I'm really trying not to be biased in this. But I am sharing you my journey, and my journey obviously involves my way of thinking, and so I did share some of that. My offense, let me make this clear. My offense is not to offend anybody with this. My offense is not to look down on anybody or question anybody's motive or their salvation or anything like that. There's some people that's going to look at this and they're going to be like, oh, yeah, he's really exposing. No, that's not what this is about. And then there's going to be some that's going to look at it and say, well, he's just tearing down everything. No, I don't want to do that either. That's not what this is about. The sixth seal people, they're probably not going to be happy with some of the things I said this time. The seventh seal probably not going to be happy with some of the things I said now. If Anderson heard it, they wouldn't be happy with some of the things I said. I'm not here to really try to condemn anybody or offend anybody. But sometimes just telling the story, you can't tell it without bringing into question some things. So, but let me just say right up front and make sure everybody understands this. My goal in this study is to just share with you my journey. I'm not trying to convince you of anything. I'm not trying to persuade you of embracing any idea. The truth is, I don't have solid beliefs on this teaching anymore. I still believe in the church historic view only because I've not seen anything better. I've studied other views. I don't see anything better. But I have, as I said early on, I have more questions now than I have answers. So I'm not going to try to persuade you on something that I'm not even clear on myself. That's ridiculous. I'm here to learn as well. So that's why I'm saying, if you have anything to share, please do that. The final question is, with what you've heard so far, and again, if there's more out there, share it with me. The final question is 1930 a significant year in church history? Not in our history, not in our movement's history, not in the movement of a movement's history. In church history. The Bible was written for everybody. It wasn't written for a movement. It wasn't written for a movement within a movement. So you have to decide that. I'm not here to persuade you one way or the other. All right. We'll see you next episode.